Welcome into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You figured that out because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. We've already had tech issues this morning, and I'm home with a sick kid, so we're off to a rip-roaring good start on today's show. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. We have a lot to get into today. Matvei Michkov takes the lead in the rookie points leaderboard in the National Hockey League. The Sixers continue to fall apart. Howie Roseman is apparently working the phones at the Combine. Oh, and there was a fight, well, a verbal altercation, we'll call it, between two national NFL reporters. What does all of that mean? It means that we're here for a fun Friday, a fantastic Friday, and I am very excited to spend at least a little chunk of the morning with each and every one of you. And before we get into today's topics, of course, we're going to go out to the comment section because that is where we find the lifeblood of this program. So let's go out to the comments and see what people have to say on a fantastic Friday. Chris Freed asks, will the Russ Joy Show have a March Madness pool? I think that could happen. I think there's a good possibility we could set something up. Way back when, way back in the old teaching days, I used to take a few minutes out of class at the start of March Madness, and I would go up and down the rows, and kids would pick the winner of each game. And the nice thing about that was that as those kids would, they'd pick, it was always like the nerdier kids or like the introverted kids who would end up picking the correct upsets. And you'd have like a bunch of the jocks who would be like, oh, we're stupid. And I'd be like, well, listen, you say it's a stupid pick again. We're just going to ban your entire class from participating, which is just a bad idea. So shut up. The amount of times that an introverted kid who knew nothing about college basketball would end up picking a winner, it was absurd. It happened all the time, and I loved it. It was one of those things that would make me incredibly happy, and it was one of those things that I always looked forward to every March. So you know what? Maybe we will do a March Madness pool here on the Russ Joy Show. What could possibly go wrong? I can think of a few things, but we could probably do it. I think it'd be great. Zacho is here, says, oh, yes! Greg Bondarenko with a happy Friday, everyone. All right, good. I see Ford is already being weird. I told Ford on Twitter this morning to stop being weird because he asked about a giveaway for loyal listeners, and I don't know why he doesn't understand just basic human interaction, but now he spammed the comments, at least initially, with a tweet interaction. So, Ford, this unfortunately will be the last warning. The ban from the comment section could be incoming. Perhaps I'll have to hand it off to a moderator of the show. We actually have the ability to assign moderators. Like, I could make JH or Andrew Fawcett or Jamie or Greg Bondarenko or Sean C. I can make any of these people moderators. No one person should have all that power. We'll see. JH, though, says, happy Friday, Russ. Appreciate that. Let's see. Oh, Bondarenko with some coffee and babka. Ooh, I think I still have a babka in the freezer from the last time I went up to New York, which I'll be doing again soon. Where did I get it at? Was that Russ and Daughters? I think that's where I picked up the babka. Fantastic stuff. Sean C., going back to last night's Flyers-Penguins game, the second half of the home and home. Remember, the Flyers won 6-1 at home. Lost in overtime on Thursday night. Spoiler alert. I missed the spoiler alert. It's supposed to come first. But the Flyers lose in Pittsburgh last night in overtime. Evgeny Malkin with a very patient play and then fires the puck, he said it at postgame, as hard as he could, blocker side. You get away with a loser point, which is kind of tricky. Sean C. says, as if the loser point wasn't bad enough, they're 8th of the season, by the way, totally gutless of the team to let that hit on Hathaway go unanswered. What about that culture? And then it also notes, if anyone else gets hit, Hathaway is the first one to step up and defend his guy. They should all be embarrassed. The wild part about that hit is that Tortorella, who I think has been pretty diplomatic this season, just in general, Tortorella postgame said it's one of the dirtiest hits he's seen. I don't remember if he said ever or in recent memory, but he said it's one of the dirtiest hits that he's seen. And then when he was pushed by the media about, well, do you think it was an intentional hit to like hurt Hathaway? He said, no, I don't think a player is trying to hurt another player in that situation, but it's still a dirty hit. And it was changed from a major to a minor, and the referee's rationale, I guess, was that the hit didn't happen directly to Hathaway's head, and Hathaway any kind of head issue was his head hitting the ice. Tortorella's point, of course, was the hit was a dirty hit, and it led to Hathaway hitting his head on the ice. So that's a whole mess. That will go to review. That will probably go before a league disciplinary board, and I would expect that there's going to be a suspension incoming, and they're going to essentially say it was a mistake for that not to be a major last night. But not great. Landros2 says, to be fair, I think Imama only had one shift after the hit, but yeah, WTF. And then Sean says, even if he didn't see the ice much after that, someone had to pay for it. It did not happen. Landros is right, though. Guy's going to get suspended. The refs deemed it a 2-minute minor. That will be twice this year. Woof. Let's see. JH says that he had a bones to dust comment that disappeared. I don't know what that was. I have all the comments back to 8:42 a.m., JH. I don't see a bones to dust comment. Where did it go? I don't know what happened. I didn't intentionally get rid of a comment. I only have what's available to me here, where it aggregates. I would love to know what the bones to dust comment was. Anyway, Allison checks in. That Flyers game last night with a facepalm. Greg Bondarenko felt the same way. Joe Papel is here. I don't know, Joe, are you in Pennsylvania or are you down in the Sunshine State? Where are you checking in from this morning? Bob Wright says, a new Eagles quarterbacks coach, which we weren't really going to get to today, probably in the rundown. But I love the fact that we are in the midst of another overhaul. And I think that ultimately for the Eagles, it's always good to bring in outside voices. So Scott Loeffler, or Leffler, I don't know what he goes by. Scott Loeffler, like if it's German, which it probably is, and it's that O-E is an umlaut, Scott Loeffler, he's not going to go by that, is leaving Bowling Green, where he served as head coach, to take over the Eagles' QB coach job. So that's a hell of a glow up for him. Good on him. I forget the name of the guy that had been considered, but was another Italian-American, and I loved the idea of, Big Dom DeSandro becoming James Gandolfini, becoming, Dom Soprano. Leffler is not really a very good Italian name. But good on the Eagles for going out and finding their guy. Again, an outside-the-box hire, bringing in a college head coach, somebody who can also kind of take into account maybe not the CEO approach that Nick Sirianni has as head coach with this team, but perhaps gives a little bit more insight into how his role as QB coach kind of fits within the larger offense as a whole. Probably becomes part of those conversations around building the scheme for the week. Probably helps not with the play calling necessarily, but maybe can help with the passing game coordination. Seems like a solid enough hire. I don't really know anything about the guy, but I want to imagine that at this point, not a bad hire. Jumping from the college ranks to the pros. Good for him. Nick Bott over on YouTube says, the Flyers are doing Flyer things. Fans think a win streak means playoffs when it was a bad play from the other team. Very excited for the draft. Because this has now become a true focal point of our show, it's become something that is something that I think we all look forward to each and every episode. I think on Wednesday, the Flyers were 8th in the lottery standings. I think they were 8th. I'm pretty sure they were 8th. By virtue of losing last night in overtime, the Flyers are now 7th. All right, so let's take a goosey gander at the lottery standings right now. Now, keep in mind, and we've been through this a few times, the top 2 spots in the draft are determined via lottery. Everything else just goes by the reverse chronological order. It goes by reverse order of fewest points, right? So again, if you were to finish the season in 7th and you were to get leapfrogged by 2 of the teams below you, the worst the Flyers would be able to pick at would be 9th, which is okay. I mean, it's not anything that I think anybody would get totally hyped about, but still. 9th pick in the draft, better than 14th. Okay. Now, because Pittsburgh picked up the win, Flyers pick up a point. That gap between the teams goes from 4 to 3. But as you can see here once again, and I've been pretty consistent about this, I just think that at this point, Nashville is probably going to continue to fall. They're 3-7-0 in their last 10 games. I think it's more likely than not that San Jose, Chicago, and Nashville represent your bottom 3 teams this season. I don't see any of them getting hot. So then you're looking in this range, this realistically 4 to 15 range. You're looking at teams that are separated by 8 points, from 54 with Seattle in 60 games to 62 points with a bunch of these teams, including St. Louis, Boston, Ottawa, the Rangers. So it's going to be close. And as I've been consistent, and I will continue to be consistent in saying, while many scouts believe that the 5th pick through 15th or 18th are virtually the same quality of player, which on one hand is good and on another maybe is a little bit disappointing, I'd rather have my choice of, let's say, that group of 10 or 12 players than get one of the final 3 remaining. So, with all of that in mind, we are going to do the other thing that we like to do here as we get excited for what could potentially happen with your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers. Let's run the lottery. Let's just see. Maybe will it be a fantastic Friday, or is it going to just be like a failure Friday? All right, here we go. We only do this once an episode. The winner here, San Jose. Oh, we don't like this. We don't like this. Anaheim jumps 6 spots, which would push the Flyers down to 8th. Now, again, a lot of games remain. The Flyers have 22 games remaining. They have an absolutely brutal stretch in March. The 6-1 win over Pittsburgh at home a few nights ago was a great win, especially if you're a big rivalry fan, and especially if you really hate the Pittsburgh Penguins still, even though I think a lot of the fire of that rivalry has essentially gone away. If you're one of the people who gets incredibly hyped for that game, then that was a big win, at least in your mind. The game against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh was disappointing on a few levels, and probably the most disappointing of all is that you had a 3-0 lead, and you allowed that Pittsburgh team to get back into it, ultimately to force overtime. And then the final goal that's scored by Malkin, I said earlier, it was a patient play, and it was a clutch play, and it's one of the best to do it in recent memory. He's up to, I think, 510 career goals. Malkin just blows one past Ersson, blocker's side. Can't do anything about it. That goal falls in large part on both Travis Konechny and Matvei Michkov, who blew their coverages, and it was just not a great goal to give up in OT. Now, the part of me that says, hey, good, you want the loss. Don't end up with another 4-point swing. If you're in that place that I am, you go, all right, overtime, loss, fine. You don't like picking up the point. If you're somebody who likes the idea of moral victories, I guess there's a bit of a moral victory in that win. But I would say that overall, or in that loss, overall, it's okay. Like, you walk away from that 2-game set, you end up with 3 points. Pittsburgh ends up with 2. The gap between you in the lottery spots hasn't gotten that bad. So we'll see. Landros 2 says, the old Friday flu. Clockwork for one of my kids every week. Landros, I got to tell you, our only kid that didn't get the flu with the rest of the family, we assumed he was patient 0 and we just didn't know. Nope. On Tuesday, he came home with a fever, and he has been home with me since, and he's currently eating a cheesesteak burrito, breakfast burrito. So it stands to reason that he is feeling considerably better than he was earlier this week, but he's bummed out. He's like our most studious kid, too, so he's like very brokenhearted that he's missing school. But that's where we're at. Okay. Let's see. Sean C. says, like I said, I'm more pissed about the non-answer to Hathaway being knocked out on the ice, and that damn loser point doesn't help. I wish they would have lost 2 minutes earlier. Well, sure, because that would have made up the gap that you created by the regulation win in Philly. KW1323 says, will Michkov get serious Rookie of the Year consideration, or has it already been determined that Celebrini will win it? I think that it's a very good likelihood Celebrini is going to win it no matter what. The interesting thing here is that Celebrini missed more games but has played more minutes overall this season than Michkov. So, that'll be one thing that I'm sure they're going to, the voters, will probably hold over Michkov and will likely give it to Celebrini. Oh, there we go with the camera. There we go again. All right, we're going to come over here. This is becoming, I think I know why it's happening with the other thing. But it is starting to drive me a little bit crazy. Anyway, we're going to go over here for a second. So, the Celebrini thing, the reason why I think they're going to hold it over Michkov, which they shouldn't. I mean, it's a genuinely stupid thing to hold over Mishkov's head, is I am of the opinion right now that they're going to look at games played, and they, for some reason, are going to try to use that against Matvei Michkov. And it doesn't make any sense. Like, realistically, if you're trying to come up with how do you determine who wins Rookie of the Year, who wins the Calder Trophy? Like, for me, I look at point production, and I ultimately probably would, to some extent, look at games played and minutes played. And it's kind of hard to argue the fact that, like, John Tortorella multiple times this season has sat Matvei Michkov, has scratched him from games, has removed him from games, has limited his ice time. I mean, even if you think about last night, there's an opportunity in that game potentially for Matvei Michkov to get himself more minutes. I think he ended up playing 14 minutes. And I know that it was part of a very big Twitter debate, and this is just what happens now with Michkov and when it comes to Tortorella. But from my vantage point, I go, in the midst of this rebuild and in the midst of knowing what this team is supposed to be, I would like to just have Matvei Michkov kind of figure it out as a player. I'd much rather see Matvei Michkov become a guy who's allowed to kind of work through the growing pains. And when you look at that overtime goal and you look at what ultimately probably cost them the game in overtime, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's crazy to say that the Flyers probably would have been better off if they had just allowed Michkov to play more minutes. And sure, he blows a coverage in overtime. There's no debating it. And yet, it is a rebuild, and I'd rather that guy kind of figure things out in a season that doesn't really matter rather than, I don't know, the idea that I guess Tortorella is trying to instill good values in the player, good responsibility in the player, there is truth to that. And at the same time, I sit back and say, what's best for the team and what's best for Matvei Michkov long term? Torts might be right. And at the same time, I've been pretty consistent about saying this. I think next year the team has a good chance of making the playoffs. And if that's the case, I don't know if you want him going through those kind of growing pains next year. But that's where I'm at. Maybe I'm crazy. I could be. I don't think I am, but I could be crazy. Let's see. Now, I know that there are people who believe that the draft is going to end up being rigged. And it looks like over in the comments we're getting a lot of that as well. Let's see. Zacho says, at least we lost and didn't go on a winning streak. Got to stay with the rebuild plans and sell at the trade deadline. Years of Fletcher have me nervous. We're going to add all of a sudden. They're not going to add. There is no chance this team adds, unless it's to add that 1C that they haven't been able to get to this point, that they haven't been able to draft, that they haven't been able to get in free agency. I see virtually no chance whatsoever that you are going to see the Flyers add at the trade deadline. Now, the questions are out there about Scott Laughton. It was reported again yesterday or the day before that Winnipeg has offered a second-round pick for Scott Laughton. Listen, Scott Laughton's not worth a first-round pick. By most metrics, he's just not. But the trade deadline every year gets weird, and we see players go for above value. And Danny Briere last year at the trade deadline said, we're not going to take market value for Scott Laughton. It needs to be above market value. Everyone you talk to around the team, whether it's media, whether it's players, whether it's people from within the organization, front office, they all say that Laughton brings so much from a leadership standpoint that you can't move on from him. And I think it's crazy. I think it genuinely is a crazy thing. But listen, leadership is important to an extent. But then I look at next year and I say, Jet Lashenko is going to be here, and he's going to need a place on this roster. Jet Lashenko is going to need to probably play center somewhere. I think at some point you have to consider moving Laughton. I think that they probably should have done it a year and a half ago. There have been rumors out there that high picks were offered, or high conditional picks were offered to the Flyers over the last couple of seasons, and they didn't take it. I just don't think that there's a ton of value here from a player perspective. Leadership perspective, sure. But as you try to flip the switch on this thing, I just don't think Scott Laughton's a guy that you need to build around. Now, would I take a second-round pick? I don't know. Second round seems kind of low, and at the same time, I know that he's probably not worth a first. So we'll try to figure that out. Jim Cochran says, thank God it's Friday. Who's already tailgating for the Union home opener tomorrow? Just me? Jim, if you're already down there at the Wharf building or wherever they move the fans to now because they keep building things in that parking lot, if you're already down there tailgating for the Union home opener, good on you. Proud of you. But that seems like a lot. But be sure to send over pictures and video and everything of anybody else who might be tailgating out there today. I'm assuming that that's sarcasm, but we'll see. People were excited after the 4-2 win last week against Orlando City. So I'll tell you what, I actually went out of my way. I initially went to cancel the MLS package on Apple TV Plus. I set it to cancel at February, whatever. And then I think it was a day or two before the season started, I thought about it. I thought about my son playing soccer and how he's all into soccer now. And I said, all right, fine. And so I re-upped it for another year. They brought me back in. Just when I thought I was out, they brought me back in. Jamie says, can't tank properly and can't stick up for a teammate who always sticks up for teammates. Embarrassing culture about the Hathaway hit. I get it. I do. Andrew Fawcett says, greetings all. May have to bounce out, but wanted to say hello. Hello, Andrew. I wore the Buc-ee's hat today, by the way. Wore it to the bus stop. That was important. Very nice and warm. Let's see. Sean C. says, March is a tough gauntlet, which is true. I think we looked at it the other day, but it's brutal. There's a 7 games in 11 days stretch in the middle of March. They're all home games, but 7 games in 11 days is crazy. And the overall month of March is wild. And they're playing a lot of really good teams. Now, is it possible that they galvanize together somehow and they end up upsetting a bunch of the best teams in the league? Maybe, but oof. Let's see. Landros 2 says, funny how we can't trade Risto now because he's too good. A year ago, the thinking was we had to eat the contract or take back another Johansson. I am of two minds with Risto. There is a part of me that says, of course you trade Risto. Of course you trade him if you get a first-round pick offer, especially for 2026. I'd be done collecting draft capital for 2025 if it were me. But if somebody comes and offers you a 2026 first-round pick, you don't have to take back a bad contract, all that. Big part of me says, hell yeah, absolutely. And then there's a part of me that says, the real part of me goes, well, this team's just not going to trade him because they probably think they're going to make the playoffs next year or they're going to fight for it. And they're going to say, well, you have to go replace Aristo. How do you replace Aristo? Who's available in free agency or in a trade? You're going to have to give up capital somehow to get that guy. And so they're going to somehow tell themselves that Risto, big-bodied defenseman, they have too many small guys, York, Andre, Drysdale, and they're just not going to trade him. I don't know. If you're going to be a playoff team next year, I've always heard about playoff Risto, even though he's never been to the playoffs. There's a small part of me that would like to see what does playoff Risto look like. And at the same time, again, it's if a 2026 first-round pick is floated out there, I absolutely consider it. I just don't think they will. I think that's ultimately the problem. I don't think that it's going to be a matter of the Flyers don't get offered a high pick for Risto. He has done enough this year to prove that he can be a top 4 defenseman. You can make a case that just based on the physicality, based on his age, based on all of that, that Risto could be a really great trade deadline addition to any playoff team or any Stanley Cup contending team. But I don't think they're going to move him. I think Laughton is probably 70% likelihood they trade. Risto, I think, is going to be 25%. I think they'd have to have their doors blown off in order for them to trade Risto. Amy says, Flyers fans are mad when they lose and mad when they win. Yeah, that's Philadelphia. It is. I mean, in fairness, we could also take a look at the other side. We could take a look, we did Tankathon for the NHL. I don't know, is now an appropriate time to do a Tankathon for the NBA? I think it might be because, Paul George announced on his podcast that he's going to be shutting down the show for the foreseeable future, which we'll get to here in a second because it's batshit crazy. Let's go over to Tankathon for the NBA. As of right now, the Sixers would keep their pick. They have the 6th worst record in the NBA. They need to continue losing. They have lost 9 straight games. They're 1-9 in their last 10. All right, let's sim the lottery. Will the Sixers keep their pick or are they going to lose it? Let's say they stay right at 6. I guess you would take that. Listen, ultimately, I think we can all agree the best thing for the Sixers is to lose because this team is going nowhere this season. Embiid's knee is a serious concern, and Paul George is a concern in and of himself. Get that top 6 pick. And I've been saying it consistently, and I'll continue to say it. For the love of God, please get rid of Daryl Morey. Please fire Daryl Morey into the sun. We are so beyond time for Daryl Morey to be gone. At this point, I don't know how anybody could try to rationalize him sticking around. Now, a thing came out a couple days ago, and this is me kind of transitioning to the Sixers briefly, and then we'll probably end up coming back to the Flyers, and we have some other stuff, and there's the NFL writer spat. But, I somehow got balloons going up. Good for me. There was a really big announcement that was made earlier this week, and I think that we owe it to this player. We owe it to this guy to give him credit. Paul George went on his podcast, and he was brave. He was truly, truly brave. Paul George announced that after some consideration, he's going to be stepping away from his podcast, at least for the foreseeable future, that he's going to be shutting it down a little bit. And I want you to hear from him why it is that he says he's going to be stepping away. So let's go over to Paul George here really quick, because podcast P. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Fellas, it's no secret. This season is up to this point, man. It hasn't been what we envisioned. I know my goal when I first signed with Philadelphia was to bring a championship to these amazing fans here. I still remain positive about that, and that is still the case and where I'm coming from.
Okay, so we had a little bit of pander there. The great fans of Philadelphia. We love Philadelphia, don't we, folks? A little bit of pander. Wanted to bring a championship, wanted to make the playoffs, thinks that it's still, that's a really unfortunate place for me to pause it, but still believes that there's a possibility. Okay.
With that being said, though, I want to let the Podcast P family know that after today's episode with Dwight, I plan to take a break from the pod just to focus on getting my body right.
So he's going to take a pause on the podcast to get his body right. Do we assume that means he has not gotten his body right to this point in the season?
Getting mentally right.
Was he not mentally right already?
And, help this squad make a push towards our goal to finish the season out, give ourselves a chance to be in contentions to compete for a championship.
Huh? Wait a second. I don't know what day he recorded this. Okay, this dropped. This started going viral on Wednesday, the 26th. Now, maybe he recorded this over the weekend or he recorded it even earlier in the week. But remember, on Wednesday's show, we broke down his comments where he said, we don't look like a team. We're not a team that has the right habits. We're not a team that competes. Like, we're not a team. Like, he fucking shredded his team, which I respect. I know people took some umbrage with what he said, but I love when the athletes are actually fair and honest about their team. So he shredded his team post-game earlier this week that they're not a team that will compete for a playoff spot. They haven't shown the right habits. They just don't seem to have it in them. And then this clip drops like a day or two later, and I want to be fair here. He might have recorded this clip, before he went and spoke to the media post-game, and maybe it's just kind of out of order. But we're going to go back over to Paul George real quick. Go ahead.
I won't front. The desire to get back to shooting in person with my guys as well is the forefront of, this hiatus as well. I look forward to us three being back together and doing this as we once started this. So we'll be back on that note. Be sure to lock in with us because we got some big things in store in our future. In the meantime.
Wow. Okay, so we're just going to stop there. So I have no issue with Paul George having a podcast. I have no issue with any of the athletes right now with podcasts. We've broken down Micah Parsons' podcast in the past. We talked about Big Play Slay going on that show earlier in the year and kind of seemingly shading CJGJ, and that probably caused a little bit of an issue potentially in the locker room. In fairness, like Draymond Green has a show, and a lot of guys have shows, and that's fine. But the optics of this, with how Paul George has played this year, and the timing of it, of him kind of going out of his way to say that, I need to get my body right and get my mind right. Like, I don't know. Am I old man yelling at clouds if I say, like, he should have done that earlier this season? Like, listen, doing a podcast isn't in and of itself the hardest thing. Like, what I do, where I'm the only person responsible for any of it, all right, like, that's still not that hard. Now, we have video guy Amadeo who does a great job, and he loads up all the socials, and he loads up all the channels, and we're bringing in a lot of subscribers that way, which is great. And without him, I would be lost in this world because I used to have to do all that stuff myself. So he's been a huge resource. But, like, Paul George isn't doing that, right? Like, the guys on his show are probably the ones responsible for coming up with the rundown. There's probably a team that does all the editing. He goes in, he's the talent, he talks into the microphone, and then he pieces out. I don't know how often Paul George does his show, but just conceptually, like, getting on a mic, spending an hour, 2 hours doing a show should not inhibit him from being the best player he can be. So it's weird, and like the optics around it aren't great. And then national media, of course, jumped onto it. Like Stephen A. Smith jumped all over it, was very animated, was very Stephen A. about it. And I want to get over there really quick because Stephen A., you never have to worry about him having things to say. And who knows, maybe he's going to run for president at some point because that's been going around. And he's been doing the rounds about a potential presidential run. But first, let's go to him and Rudy Gay from, I think this was yesterday. Let's hear what Stephen A. had to say about Paul George and about him needing to step away from the podcast to get his mind and his body right.
What I would do is I'd have sat down for the rest of the year because the Sixers are trash. They're horrible. Mm-hmm. They're awful, yes. Primarily because of the health of Joel Embiid. Without him, you're not going anywhere anyway.
Yo, by the way, this up top, this is fantastic. Paul of Duty. Oh, I love it.
And as a result, if you're Paul George, you're only putting yourself and taxing stuff from your body that you don't need to be taxing. You got 3 years to go on a max 212 deal.
So to be clear, as we're dropping in on this clip, Stephen A. Smith clearly believes that based on where the Sixers are and what's best for the Sixers, which is getting that top 6 protected pick, Paul George, instead of shutting down the podcast, should essentially be shutting down Paul George, the basketball player. And I have to say, I kind of agree. Like at this point, Paul George can't really do anything over the last 20 whatever games to go out and like change people's opinions of him. He can't really do much to change the opinion of the greater Delaware Valley and whether or not he was a good signing or not. It probably would have made more sense for him to kind of shut down the basketball side. Now, in fairness, if he weren't playing and we're still doing the podcast, it probably would have a more negative impact on the public perception of him as a human being. So maybe he shuts down the podcast and he's in and out of the lineup for the remainder of the season, but he's not putting hard minutes on his body. But we'll go back out to Stephen A.
Okay, prioritize the next 3 years. This season is done. You ain't winning a damn thing. You ain't getting nothing out of this season. Go home, get yourself right, and be ready for next season.
I think the exact opposite. I think he needs to go out there. He needs to play with those guys, get a good feel on how to play, and Embiid will be out. I think Maxey is there for the future. I think he needs to play. He needs to play and become the Paul George we know.
Wow.
He turns 35 in May.
Ooh.
He turns 35 in May, bro.
Here. That's what we do.
No. You gotta wait. He got to be ready for the next 3 years. And oh, by the way, last point for you, Al. Josh Harris, I want to make sure everybody understands.
This is a good spot.
Josh Harris, the owner of the Sixers, is also the owner for the Washington Commanders.
This comes back to, if you remember, not that long ago on this show, I pointed out the fact that Josh Harris, when he was hiring down in Washington with the Commanders, Bob Myers, former architect of the Warriors dynasty, sat on an advisory committee, on an advisory hiring committee. And now let's let that, he doesn't mention Bob Myers' name here, but I want you to hear what Stephen A. Smith has to say about the front office with the Sixers now that we've set the context about Paul George, about this lost season, and about the fact that he probably should shut down because they want that top 6 pick. All right, let's go back out.
Who's the co-owner in his group? Magic. It would happen to be Irvin Magic Johnson. And if you Daryl Morey, I don't know whether it's true or not, but if rumors are correct that Josh Harris told you he was leery on giving Joel Embiid a max extension, and you said, Daryl Morey, it had to be done. If those reports are true, change is coming to Philadelphia. It's just a prediction.
So, in fairness, I think that the rumors are getting louder. And it seems like from multiple national media pundits, the rumors around Daryl Morey's seat as president of basketball ops is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And if you're a Sixers fan, I think it's a great thing. Because again, what has Daryl Morey won? Nothing to this point in this league. He has not won a championship. He has not led a team to the NBA Finals. Friends, it's time to move on. And it's time to move on before it's all over. Let's see. All right, Jamie over on YouTube knows says that Paul George releases a podcast weekly. Okay. Sounds good. JH says, if Stephen A. Smith runs for president and actually gets nominated, I'm never voting again, which Jamie agrees with. I love this. Nico goes, Paul of Duty. JH goes, more like Paul of Duty. A feces joke on the show. Connor Buss says, love it. Don't let the door hit your ass on the way out, Daryl. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be tough for him to still have support after this. Landros says Daryl Morey's starting to look like a Chuck Fletcher hire. In fairness, Morey oversaw teams that did a much bigger overhaul of their roster, and he did that multiple times in Houston. And so, like, I could see looking at it and saying that from the perspective of somebody who wants to, like, see the team get shaken up a little bit, I understand why you would want to go after Daryl Morey. And if you're a big analytics guy, Daryl Morey's kind of the guy to go after. But he hasn't won anything. And if Bob Myers is legitimately out there and looking for a job, and you can have Bob Myers come in and maybe revamp this team, revamp this organization, you could certainly do a lot worse. Now, did Bob Myers benefit from Steph Curry falling in the draft and from also snagging Klay Thompson? Like, sure. But I don't think that it's just a bunch of luck. I don't think that being a front office executive is all luck. I just fundamentally don't agree with that. So if he's out there and he's available and there's that prior relationship between Josh Harris and Bob Myers, that's the guy I'd go after. Hopefully you have that top 6 protected pick. And I say, fix it. Just do whatever you need to do. Here are all the resources in the world. Fix it. Try. Please, for the love of God, fix it. Okay. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to get to. Ford says Sixers are probably set back for 5+ years. I actually disagree with that. Believe it or not, I do. The Sixers are in a very weird place where they have like 2 different kind of plans running simultaneously, right? On one hand, you have what looks like a big mistake in the max extension given out to Joel Embiid. And you have this very apparent mistake of a contract given out to Paul George. And yet, there are teams in this league that will look to trade for Paul George. Paul George's name came up around the deadline. For whatever reason, I think that Paul George probably gets traded this offseason, and I think that there are going to be teams lining up to take a shot. Embiid is the bigger issue because if the organization, right, like if you look at the most recent reports, the organization is shocked at how Embiid's body reacted to the most recent treatment. And they thought this was going to work. And they thought that surgery wasn't required. But then Embiid went out publicly and essentially said, like, he needs another surgery. So it seems like there's discord between the organization and the player, which is bad, very bad, especially for the face of the franchise. If Embiid were to somehow get better, I don't know what that looks like, but if Embiid were somehow able to get better, and again, you could build a team where he's the second or third option, great. Because you have to remember, whatever Paul George gets traded for, because again, I think he will get traded, whatever he gets traded for, whatever comes back in that deal is presumably going to be helpful in some way, shape, or form. And then you look at what you have going on the other side. Tyrese Maxey is a young star. Jared McCain, prior to the knee injury, looked really, really good. Much better than anybody expected him to. Am I ready to say Jared McCain is going to be a perennial all-star? Of course not. But McCain looked good. Top 6 protected pick. What kind of an impact will that player make in his first year? Remains to be seen. You would hope that his top 6 pick is going to end up being a multi-time All-Star. So just in theory, between Maxey McCain and this top 6 pick, I don't know. Like, that's a good young core potentially to build around. And oh, by the way, you have a former MVP that if you can ever get his body back to working at like 80, 85%, that's bigger than any kind of free agent acquisition you could make. I get it. I get the hesitancy. I get why people would think that it's all bullshit, but I'm just saying, for whatever reason, I think that there's a chance that they could somehow pivot this and like not end up in the worst place ever. Like, teams that have aging superstars that end up trading them, it usually takes a few years before they go out and they find a star in the draft. Maxey has become a guy who legitimately looks like a star. McCain looked good, top 6 pick. There are worse places to start from, even if you had to like try to zero out and start again with a rebuild. Let's see. Chris Freed says, Russ and his magic beans for the Sixers segment. I know. Jim Cochran says, tough argument you make when you have to get by Boston. I just don't think that the Sixers are in position that they're ever going to get past this Boston team now. I think that, like, ultimately, if you trade Paul George, Embiid's kind of out on the periphery, you're probably looking at trying to be in that next wave that you're looking to, like, capitalize 3 years from now, which sucks. And nobody's going to be excited about, especially because this team was thought to be a legitimate title contender. I don't know. Adam Glickus over on YouTube asks, can Howie please help the Flyers and Sixers? Phillies are set. No, they're not. Man, I think the Phillies are going to be a mess. The Phillies are going to be, like, fine. They need another bat. They don't have that bat. Makes me worried. James Grasso over on YouTube says, funny how every person that follows the Sixers knew Embiid was cooked, but Morey signed him to a supermax. Ford now calls me Russ Zangaro. Oh, it kind of hurts a little bit. JH says, the process has failed. Time to make Tyrese the face of the franchise. Who says no? I don't know. There was actually a report that came out yesterday that apparently before the Karl Anthony Towns trade and the Mikal Bridges trade, the Knicks were ready to offer like every pick they had for Joel Embiid. Like that was their thought before the Cat trade and the Mikal Bridges trade, was they were just going to try to like offer up this war chest of picks to the Sixers. Do we think that Daryl Morey regrets not taking that potentially? I don't know. Really don't know. Okay. Let's see. What's this? Ford says, when I say done, I mean they won't win anything meaningful for at least 5 years. Yeah, I mean, if you trade Paul George, you're essentially giving up on the hope of trying to win something anytime soon, because you're not going to find the third option or the second option that's going to like take you to the next place. Okay, like you don't have another guy that I think you could pursue right now that would take you to another level, which sucks. If you trade him and you have him, like the Embiid thing is such a mess. It's a legitimate black cloud just kind of like looming over the organization right now, until they can hopefully find something to like make that knee at least somewhat workable. But otherwise, if Embiid is out and you trade Paul George, then Ford's right. Like the Sixers won't be able to compete for anything. It's going to be Maxey McCain in this top 6 pick, and you're kind of starting from ground zero again. Sean C. says, take calls on Embiid. He needs a change as much as any team does. I don't know. What are you going to get for him? So, okay, like let's play this one out. Say there are 3 or 4 teams that are interested in Joel Embiid. They need to have the cap space for that enormous contract. That's one, okay? If Embiid somehow gets fixed, then you look like an absolute idiotic franchise. I don't think that there's a high probability that he gets fixed, like if he goes to another team. I hate to say it, but it really feels like it's the end for Joel Embiid, or the end is very close, which is an absolute shame. I need to get off this. I don't want to be negative on a Friday. I'm feeling about as sad as I can about things. So let's go to the final story of the day, which, of course, is a spat that happened at a Starbucks at the Combine in Indy. And it's a total mess, like a total disaster, because if you were following this on Twitter, there was a report that was put out between Jordan Schultz and Ian Rapaport. And there was a back and forth because Schultz had reported, where did I put? I had it before. I was very happy that I remembered to take a screenshot of something because I knew I wasn't going to be able to find it again later in the day. I think I might have it. But Schultz and Rapaport were both reporting around this idea that Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady had met up in Montana, and that in doing so, Brady, who's a minority owner of the Raiders, was trying to woo Matthew Stafford to go to the Raiders. And then there was another report that came out that like essentially tried to refute it and say like, no, it was not an active attempt to try to get Stafford to consider the Raiders. Instead, it was just a coinky-dink because both Stafford and Brady own houses at the same resort or whatever in Montana or whatever. And then that led to a verbal spat at a Starbucks in Indianapolis because Jordan Schultz of Fox and Ian Rapaport of NFL.com and the NFL Network got into a verbal altercation. Now, it didn't just happen at your run-of-the-mill Starbucks. It happened at a Starbucks at the JW Marriott in Indianapolis. Nice hotel, right? You don't usually see two reporters getting into it, but it's very, very interesting because it did happen. And Pro Football Talk kind of ran with the story, and they noted that it's funny that it happened at a Starbucks because Jordan Schultz is the son of the former Starbucks CEO, Howard Schultz. And Schultz decided to not go the Starbucks route, but he decided to go the NFL reporting route. So Rapaport was apparently talking to an agent at this Starbucks. Schultz approached Rapaport and said, we need to talk, or something similar to it, at which point Rapaport said, we don't need to talk. Schultz then made accusations about Rapaport, and then Rapaport said the accusations were unfounded. The guys were face-to-face or very close. Schultz then apparently says to Rapaport, if you have anything to say to me, say it to my fucking face. And then says, if this continues, we're going to have a fucking problem. So, woof, woof. And then Rapaport apparently said, yo, step back. And then Schultz apparently said again, if this happens again, we're going to have a fucking problem. Now I'll step back. And then this got reported to NFL security. So very rare that two insiders get into it in a public setting. Profanity. Are they getting close to each other? Oh boy. Like, what an absolute mess between two of these people who are, to varying degrees, viewed as being two of the best insiders, two of the best reporters or whatever in the league. Now, again, so much of this happened because Schultz reported that Stafford met with Brady, and Rapaport said it was essentially a coincidence that they met up or that they ran into each other. So it's essentially this Schultz puts this thing out. He believes in his reporting that this was more of a formal pitch. Rapaport kind of deadpans and, kind of pours some water on Schultz's report. Schultz has his own, amount of belief or whatever in what he does. And so it leads to this face-off between the two. Now, the funny thing is that this then went around all over the place, including on NFL Network, because Rapaport has a job to do. And so this was, I guess, Thursday afternoon. Rich Eisen, who's fantastic. Rich Eisen welcomes Rapaport onto the show at the Combine. I just want you to hear what he had to say when welcoming Rapaport, who was involved in this altercation, to the show. Let's bring him on now.
There is one other member of our broadcast team we've got to bring in. And he is the Jake Paul of NFL Network. Lots of buzz. He's trending with no punches thrown. Ian Rapaport. Rap sheet?
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, I would say I'm
He looks a little under-caffeinated, actually, to be honest.
No,
Under-caffeinated.
I'm properly caffeinated. A lot of great coffee brands. Dunkin' does a really nice job.
Nice.
Beats actually is a fantastic coffee. I could go on and on about the coffee brands that I love. That's not for right now. Let's talk right now about Abdul Carter, the Penn State.
And then he pivots out of it, which is a shame. But I thought it was wild. I thought that the Rapaport side of this was wild. Shouting out Dunkin' instead of Starbucks, also kind of wild. And then, of course, because it's pop culture and it has to do with sports, it also made its way to inside the NBA, where Shaq and Charles Barkley took it to a whole other level. We're going to go there real quick. By the way, Connor Buss says that Jake Paul comment is diabolical. Greg Bondarenko says, fireworks at Starbucks. Love it. JH also likes it, says, this is good shit. All right, let's go over to Inside the NBA and hear what Shaq and Charles Barkley had to say about Schultz versus Rapaport.
Charles Barkley. Gentlemen, how are we?
I'm in a good mood, man.
Why is that?
Well, because I was at Starbucks today.
And?
No matter how you feel about Charles Barkley, okay? And, like, there are some people who I think are wildly misguided that they don't like Inside the NBA. There is an actual, believe it or not, there are people who don't like Inside the NBA because they think that those guys have a huge platform and they kind of poo-poo on the current product, which in fairness, I'd say is fair because the current product largely just isn't what it used to be. But Charles Barkley immediately starts the segment with a wonderful, absolutely wonderful remark about Starbucks. All right, let's keep going.
Bucks today.
And?
It's dangerous in
And you can hear the production assistants and everybody else behind the cameras cackling.
there already. Those fists flying everywhere. I was like, see, I don't normally go to Starbucks because that's where rich white folks go. I used to get
Rich white folks go
Yeah,
to
I love to go with black
Is that
folks.
the place where
Yeah, that's what
Apparently
they
it's where a lot of reporters go
But
to.
Apparently.
$2 coffee
No,
is where
no.
you have to be rich.
Ain't no $2 coffee. They should be drinking Folgers like the rest of us do.
Oh my God.
That's great.
You know we're in the,
And then-
you know we're
right,
in
here
the
you go.
presence
So
of
then
Jordan
they
Schultz
kind of
has
recapped what
verbally
happened.
accosted Ian Rapaport of NFL Media.
We're gonna
You
skip
see that
ahead
kind of
a little
words they
bit.
use? Accosted.
Oh, yeah, they used the word accosted. Schultz accosted Rapaport. All right, we're gonna
Whooping
keep
his
going.
ass. That's what happened.
Yeah, Jordan.
Yeah, you'll stop
what I
talking
told you,
now.
Jordan.
Get that Frappuccino thing right next time.
Hey, you know we're in the presence
funny
of
about that
royalty tonight. What?
And now Shaq weighs in.
You know what's funny about that story?
What is?
I've been knowing Jordan for a long time. Of course, his father's Howard Schultz. He could have owned all the franchise, but he decided to go a different route. Ball was
That kind of goes back to what I was saying before. Howard Schultz, owner or the former CEO of Starbucks. Jordan Schultz had this opportunity like right at his fingertips. Jordan Schultz could have essentially like maybe run Starbucks, like the entire entity, Starbucks, and chose to go into reporting about the NFL. But we'll go back to Shaq.
respected Jordan for that. But yeah, Jordan, hope you got it.
Ian, I got Ian in this one.
May 19th.
Let's do it.
19th.
Hey, we'll
Of
let them
course.
go first as a warm up, then me and you will go.
So there you go. I just thought it was funny. I think that, like, listen, do I like media dust-ups? I think they're funny. One of these times, and this is a good point by Ford. So there's no video of the dust-up? Oh, of course there are. There is absolutely video somewhere. There has to be. I mean, one, there has to be video within the hotel, within the Starbucks itself. Somebody had to have gotten it on video. Somebody had to. Maybe it'll end up over on TMZ. I don't know. But I'm like very into it. As we know, I've been accused in the past of trying to like stir some shit media-wise, right? I enjoy the idea of two guys who work for different outlets kind of facing off, going maybe nose to nose, going close where you can smell that caramel macchiato on the other dude's breath. Other guy's got his cortado in the other hand, and they're barking back and forth about reporting the news about Stafford and Brady. They're lined up, they're eye to eye, and then they realize, excuse me, I'm supposed to have coconut milk in this. We're gonna have to just back away a sec. I have to get my coconut milk in this. This is actually incorrect. I think it's great. I love it. And I love when those kind of conversations, those kind of interactions and altercations make it outside of the NFL bubble into other things. So I thought the Inside the NBA guys were pretty funny. AJ Snap checks in over on YouTube and says about Rapaport, to be fair, that was a solid pivot out of the coffee chat. It was. Where he said about Abdul Carter. Let's see. JH says Charles Barkley was great on SNL. Adam Glickus really likes the Inside the NBA show and that the NHL mimics it. It does. You know, the big takeaway, I think, is that the NHL was able not exactly to replicate Inside the NBA, but it's a more fun studio show. And I think ultimately for the growth of the NHL, it helps them to have a little bit of levity around the product. So that's always a good thing. Jim Cochran says, nothing like a couple of middle-aged white dudes getting in a dust-up. It's like what I see on weekends at the fields of Westmont Soccer Club. Ha! That was good. Linda Joseph says, Who says it's the no fun league? Oh, why can't I change the comments on the screen? Oh boy, this can't be, oh boy. This is not good. Are we going to have tech problems to end the show? Oh, there we go. AJ says, Russ, we've got some great weather this weekend. Is there a plan to smoke some wings after the Flyers lost to the Jets? I haven't smoked wings since before the Super Bowl, and I think it's time to bring them back. I think so. Chris Freed asks, what exactly is that blue thing next to the Snow the Goalie thing on the desk? Oh, it's a thumb, and it says dad. It says number one dad. So, at least in the minds of my kids, number one dad. We'll end here on a little bit of positivity because I appreciate this. Adam Glicka says, Russ, you run a smooth show with proper highlights, breakdowns, very knowledgeable opinion. I'm a fan, especially for being solo. Thank you, Adam. Checks in the mail for those comments. I do appreciate that. All right. I think we're going to end the show there. So we had Flyers talk. We had Sixers talk. We had a league-wide conversation. We had this altercation between two NFL reporters. I think it's a pretty good place to end on a fun Friday, my friends. I think it's a good time. And so I'll be back on Monday with the Russ Joy Show at 8:30 a.m. If you missed it, I did drop a new episode of It's Just Wrestling, which you can find on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. We'll probably have an episode of that show early next week instead of the regular Thursday. I think there's going to be an early week and a Thursday because I'm going to have to break down Elimination Chamber. There's a rumor, a spoiler going around about the men's Elimination Chamber match. So we'll have to talk about that. And Snow the Goalie will be back next week. And the whole month of March, we're going to have a lot of press row shows, my friends, as the Flyers have 7 games in 11 days at home. Good God. So JH says, also the number one 3-day-a-week solo Philly sports podcaster. I appreciate that. Joe Papel with a thanks and says, have a great weekend, everyone. I think that is a good place to end. So, my friends, thank you for joining me. If you can, like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And do me another favor. If you haven't done so already, when you like the video, share the video, and subscribe, go back into the regular comment section, especially if you were a live viewer. We love the live viewers in the live chat. But I would, in fact, like you to also just take a second out of your day. It doesn't have to be a long second. Just take a second out of your day. Go into the regular comment section of the episode. And when you do, leave a comment down there. Something that you liked, something that you thought I got wrong, something I got right, what you're looking the most forward to. You can give me your thoughts about the Sixers or about the Flyers, about the draft, about their plans going forward. Just head over there. Help a guy out. So, again, until Monday, this has been the Russ Joy Show, and I've been Russ Joy, but you knew that, of course, because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. I'll talk to all of you Monday morning here on the Russ Joy Show. Have a great weekend, everybody.